I think I'll always be making adventure games because it's kind of where I came from as a developer as well. Crawl was fun because it was like we wrote like, I don't know, 200 tiny little like 2 sentence snippets of like Lovecrafty kind of heavy-handed Lovecrafty purple prose stuff, which is definitely evident in the Drifter as well. Yeah, most of the inspirations were film and novels and stuff, so not so much games, but very very much got into just like going to the secondhand bookshop and like finding really cheesy looking, like finding the cheesiest like cover for a thriller and like just reading through it, and usually very schlocky Pulp Fiction kind of stuff, and then like lots of B movies, like thrillers and horror movies, from especially 70s stuff.
SIFTER.com.au.
Hello and welcome to Lightmap from SIFTER, our video game industry interview show. I'm Gianni. Those pixel masters at Melbourne's Powerhoof are back. The gritty and very Australian point-and-click adventure, The Drifter, is our topic for today, and Dave Lloyd is my guest. Let's go.
Join the SIFTER community on Discord at sifter.com.au/Discord.
So now, if you're of a certain vintage, and I am, point-and-click adventure games are some of the most interesting titles you could play at the time. I have really fond memories spending hours collecting orichalcum to get that final good ending in Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, flipping burgers in Sci-Fi Space Quest 4, and many, many more. And the Germans are still famously in love with the genre. So when I say that The Drifter is one of the best new entries into the format, I mean it. Dave Lloyd is part of Powerhoof and was last on the show back in 2018, which if you're counting is 7 years ago now. I'm thrilled to welcome you back to the show. David, welcome back to Lightmap.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, really happy to be here.
All right, now take us into the world of The Drifter. I've given a little bit of a tease, but how would you explain what this game is?
So The Drifter's pulp adventure thriller. It's kind of like a fast-paced take on the point-and-click genre, and it's about this guy, Mick Carter, who jumps a boxcar back to his hometown, and he witnesses a violent murder and then is chased by high-tech soldiers and thrown in a reservoir and drowned. And that's just the start of his problems, because he finds himself alive again seconds before his death, and he's got to escape and basically solve his own murder. It's a lot of out of the frying pan into the fire kind of situations, and trying to really kind of amp up the what's considered like a slower paced genre, usually the point and click genre. Make it a bit of a roller coaster thrill ride.
There are definitely some tense moments where you feel the clock ticking down on you, I'm really curious about sort of balancing that sort of feeling, because obviously you've got people who are very familiar with how these games are sort of being played, and they have a big experience with that, but also how do you mix it up for people who may not be as familiar?
Yeah, it's a fun kind of balance to strike. I think what sort of inspired us to make it was a game jam we did, where we tried these sort of high pressure moments where you've kind of got a chain of puzzle sort of threads. And so one little puzzle thing leads to another. Like you can't reach something, but you can reach a broom, and you knock over the broom, and like then that lets you reach the thing that's just out of reach. And but also things where like you might have the character who's like in some dire peril, and it feels like they've got seconds to live, and so you're trying to sort of get yourself out of this situation, and there might not be much you can do in that situation. You might only have one sort of thing you can interact with, but like you have a string of those together, and it kind of makes it feel like you've kind of got this sort of flow to it, and sort of this tense flow to it. And yeah, it was something which we tried out in a game jam, and it seemed to work really well, and was surprising. And so that made us want to like try and do that as a sort of full kind of longer adventure game. And
it's pretty interesting, because I think about some of those older games, because like death and losing, your place and all that stuff was always a big part of it, right? I remember the end screen of Space Quest 4 seeing it hundreds of times in very different ways, and it was very enjoyable to see all those different ones. But I guess the friction of that was often you had to go back to your manual save file and all of those sorts of bits and pieces. So what I find, and I'm curious for you to talk a bit more about this, is how those modern design elements have kind of infiltrated or I guess come into the design of this game versus the genre tropes.
Yeah, like the modern style is, pardon me, the modern style is very much avoiding anything that'll kill the player unfairly and make them reload a save game usually, and but that with losing that, you kind of lose a bit of that tension that you had in some of the really old sort of Sierra games that constantly killed you, like without any warning. But yeah. So this is kind of trying to get a balance between the player knowing where there's a bit of danger and getting that tension. But also when they do die, it's kind of built into the story. So it's not trying to kind of throw up a big game over screen and make you click a bunch of UI buttons, because I feel like that sort of takes you out of the story a lot. So it's like incorporating it in and having this character that's sort of jumping back in time, and they remember that they've died, and that's kind of part of the tension and the horror of the game as well, and part of the story and what like this mystery you're trying to solve.
One thing I found really interesting is that in order to do the game, you kind of built that sort of platform for point and click adventures, the Power Quest that you've got there. And can you talk to me about how, like, in terms of the timelines, what came first? Did you build that and then said, hey, let's do a jam game and kind of go, or how did that kind of come about?
Yeah. I definitely had that sort of in the works earlier. I got my start making adventure games or games at all in like early 2000s with this other tool called Adventure Game Studio that people are still using today, but I'd been using Unity and stuff, and so really wanted to see if I could make something that felt as easy to use as Adventure Game Studio, something I could just like chuck a bunch of dialogue in and have characters walking around and doing stuff. So I started Power Quest in, I think, 2015. Like I'd when we started Powerhoof, that was in 2013. But yeah, I'd always wanted to do adventure games, but yeah, I wanted to use the power of Unity. So I sort of started working on this tool kind of in the background, kind of as a hobby, almost as a side sort of project. But then because there was these adventure game jams that were coming up, it was like, oh, that's a good opportunity to try and make something with it. And that's when I made this little game, Peridium, which was a horror game, and the first horror game I tried making. And that was the one that sort of sparked the idea of trying to make a full-fledged thriller adventure game. So Power Quest has been really fun to work on alongside making the game as well. Like just having other people use it's really fun, and sort of having that kind of community building as well. But it's so that's been a really positive part of developing the Drifter, even though it might have maybe slowed it down compared to just using something that was already made.
You're building the boat as you're sailing along, it kind of sounds like, in a way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious as well from, when did it sort of, we've talked to you a few times over the years at PAX, you've shown the game off a number of times now. And as that was sort of building over time, I'm curious, how the game sort of changed over those sort of years since we first saw the game being displayed.
Yeah, it was funny. Like, so we kind of started it. I think I kind of started working on it in 2018, but we were still working on other games. And in 2019, we first showed it, I think, but very early. Like we had an opportunity to do a Steam, the very first Steam Next Fest or Steam Award. I can't remember what it was called. It had a different name. And we didn't want to pass that up. So I quickly threw together this demo and put some art in it. And that was the chapter 1 kind of thing. But the rest of it was so sketchy. Like I barely had anything else at that point. And so that was very early time to have a demo. Like usually would wait a lot longer. But yeah, that first demo, like the story and the things that happened in that demo really haven't changed that much, because that was always like going to be chapter 1. So really, it's been just building the rest of the game that comes after that the whole time.
I'm really interested because I've seen like some of the design documentation for some of those older games, and like, what does building out a scenario in an adventure game actually look like to you? How do you start? How do you kind of work out exactly what you're going to do in each of the level and all of the interactions?
Yeah, it's an interesting process. Like, so personally, I do a lot of free writing to just come up with just random ideas and plot ideas and puzzle ideas and bits of dialogue and things like that. And then there's a tool called puzzle dependency charts, where it's kind of a flow chart of like the where you get where the player needs to end up, for the plot to kind of move forward, and then where they're starting, and kind of put in different things that happen, different items they might get, different obstacles that might come up, and then you sort of draw this flow chart of like, okay, they're going to need to pick up a screwdriver from somewhere. Where could that be? And they've got to have that before they can do this next bit where they need the screwdriver. So, you build this complicated chart, and then it all sort of comes out and then coalesces back into one sort of node where the next interesting, cool plot point thing happens. So it's like going back and forth between sort of writing stuff and doing those charts. And then moving around nodes in there, and then trying to distill that into sort of almost a walkthrough / to-do list of what has to go in the game. But there's a lot of staring into the abyss and trying to work out, oh my God, how's this all going to hold together? That happens in between. And I've done a lot of the little game jam adventure game sort of things, which are, they're like an hour or less of playtime, and thought, oh yeah, I've got a handle on how to do this. But then trying to actually make that into a longer game, like 7+ hours. I thought, oh yeah, that's just, do that 7 times and you've got 7 hours. But it's like the complexity just explodes outward the longer it gets, and every character's suddenly got to have a bit of an arc, and there've got to be multiple subplots for it to hold together. And oh man, it did my head in trying to work it all out.
You've done a good job, because it's very, very interesting. What I also love as well, that with adventure games, there's always other interactions you can get, which aren't your like ideal interaction that you want to do to solve the puzzle. And how do you kind of say, okay, well, that one is just going to be like an offhand comment, and this one's going to be something funny and actually an actual interaction?
Yeah, I think it's something that with the way I write stuff, I guess it just flows out pretty naturally. Like, what would the character say about this? And sometimes it becomes a bit more of a thing, like a little offhand comment early on. Like there's a point where there's this sort of the character's using this device and it shocks them, like gives them electric shock when they try and use it. And then that was just an offhand comment I thought would be just like dryly amusing at the time. And then that became kind of more of like fundamental to the actual story or to the climax of the game and things like that. So things like that just, yes, sometimes it's just really random, like, and it feels natural for that to, like, a little comment early on to come up again later. So it just works out that way. And other things are very, very planned from the start. And there's stuff that I planned for the start to be like the big climax of the game, which then, because it's sort of, I don't know, it just doesn't really feel like it's got much backing, because it's just not what the character would have done, or not how the plot sort of ended up flowing. So I was definitely very responsive as I was writing it to work out what would feel right in the story.
What I really like is, in terms of the writing in it, it feels very Australian, which I am a huge fan of. And I'm curious about, thinking about the setting and setting it in Australia with all these Australian and Kiwi characters and a few international people as well. Like, why did you want to set it there? Because you could literally put it anywhere in the world. And why was that important to you?
Initially, so this came back to this early game jam game called Peridium, where I wanted to. It was the first time I'd tried to do a serious game that wasn't a comedy, and I kind of wanted to try and see how I can make it feel grounded and not just some weird dumb story I'd just made up in a few days. And one of those things was like, okay, maybe if I give the main character an Australian accent, it'll make it feel like they're from a real place, as opposed to just generic American or something, where I don't really have the subtlety and the nuance of like it being, if it's an American accent, like I wouldn't be able to say, oh, they're from this town and this is the sort of way they talk and the very specific things that they would do. Whereas, if it's an Australian, I know that and I can kind of give it that grounding. And I was really happy with that, the way it worked. And our friend Adrian Vaughan, who voices the character, like I was always going to work with him. And so that was a big part of thinking of what would be a good character to do with that voice that Adrian does, and sort of gravelly Australian. And so, the idea of this sort of this drifter sort of walking into town, down on his luck, but very sort of practical kind of guy. I think that's where that kind of initial idea came about. And then it was all about how to make things difficult for him.
I really shouldn't get involved, but hey, so...
Hi!
Right, what are you doing down here?
I write for the Herald. I really want to find out what it's like out here for you homeless.
You homeless? God help me. Okay, look, I'm not homeless, so...
Oh, great! That's great! So how long have you been staying out here, Mr.
Carter, and I'm not staying out here. Jesus, will you put that thing away?
Sorry, just a few questions.
No! Look, Angela, was it? Go home to your warm bed. No one here has any reason to talk to you.
I know that. I'm not stupid.
She thrusts her hand into her pocket, pulls out a hotel-sized bottle of rum.
Got a whole bunch. You look like you could use something to drink.
Wow. About as sensitive as I'd expect from a rich city kid.
Well, what do you want?
Nothing. Just quit with the presumptuous attitude. These are people, not your high school project.
I'm 24, and you're one to talk. Patronising asshole.
Whatever.
It gets pretty difficult for him. What I also loved is like there's some little characters in there which are just like cool references to other stuff. Like, there's a detective character called D.I. Hara, and he's dressed like the Bossozuko, and he calls everyone boss as he walks around. Like, I love that. Just little things in there that kind of really connect it to this broader stuff there. It's this game feels like of a scale that it's sort of bigger than anything else that you've done. It's got, voice acting, it's got multiple different bits and pieces, a long story-driven game. In terms of the scale of building that as a team, because you're only pretty small, right? What was it like as a challenge to actually get this to finish line?
Yeah, that's a big part of why I took 6 years. So I kind of built it, apart from the very first demo section, I sort of built it by myself the first few years. So basically making it all playable with like placeholder art. And so I could basically have a draft, like writing a novel, do a first draft, and then go back and sort of add all the things like foreshadowing and stuff that once I'd figured out what the plot would even be, and the little character arcs and like adding little bits like that to reinforce the themes and all that stuff. And so I did all that before I got like full production kind of stuff involved, so that I wasn't like getting all this stuff arted and then deciding to change it all, So that kind of meant it took longer, but it was a lot more doable in terms of the size of the team. And then it was just sort of ramping up to full production was sort of getting a few more artists on board and sort of replacing the art bit by bit. I'd never done things like voice casting and stuff and voice. I've done recording voices, but it's always just been with friends or like a couple of other people in a game jam that are just very casually doing it. Like I didn't even know a casting director was a thing, but that was something that was like super helpful. Like, oh yeah, cool. Like there's someone who will help with that stuff. But yeah, like it was a lot to figure out. It was a journey for sure.
I was when the credits rolled as well, I was interested to see like, so much of this has your hand on it, and including the writing, which I thought was like actually very funny and clever. And I'm curious about your like learning experience of doing like writing a game of that scale. Like what do you think if you cast your mind back to when you first started to what you are at now that it's out and ready to roll for players to experience?
Yeah, I really enjoyed when I guess the first couple of years working on it, when it was just probably the first half of development was doing a lot of the writing, and that was I was really enjoying deep diving into like what this whole writing thing is about, because it went way deeper than I imagined. I thought it was just like, you write and like there's some tips that you might find or whatever, but really just sort of write as well as you can kind of thing. But there's like I got right into listening to podcasts about writing and reading books about it, and about there's so many aspects to it, like dialogue and character and plot and there's every little part of writing has there's so much depth to it, and so it was quite inspiring as well. Like listening to a podcast on my commute or something, or going for a walk and listening to a podcast about writing, just getting me excited about putting these sort of principles into practice and seeing how I could flesh the dialogue out and the characters. And I found that really inspiring, listening to other writers and novelists talk about their approach and like the little tricks they use and the do's and don'ts kind of stuff. It's quite cool. And I really...
Are you keen to do it again? Like that's what I'm curious about, because obviously the games that you've made have been kind of like, there was obviously narrative in the games you've made. Crawl had a storyline written through it and all of those sorts of things. But I'm curious, like, is this the sort of thing that you're interested in doing more of?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I'll always be making adventure games because it's kind of where I came from as a developer as well. Crawl was fun because it was like we wrote like I don't know, 200 tiny little like 2 sentence snippets of like Lovecrafty kind of heavy-handed Lovecrafty purple prose stuff, which is definitely evident in the Drifter as well. The very purple prose stuff. And it's what I like about like reading a lot of thrillers and stuff where they get very florid. Like I like that stuff. But yeah, no, it's something I've always made these adventure games, and I've always loved storytelling through a game as well. I think that's always been part of like what I enjoy about playing games as well. Like is like playing for the story, even if it's Doom or something. Like I want to see what happens, you know. And so yeah, it's always been a storytelling medium for me, and that's kind of what keeps me motivated. So yeah, lots of stories I want to keep telling in the games, but hopefully I can tell them a bit faster than 6 years, because I'll run out of life before I get get enough out.
Yeah, we want to get you back on the podcast again at some point. So, can you tell me a bit about some of those influences? Because you mentioned obviously you had some sort of like craft influences there, but I'm curious about the things that you wanted to bring into this world. Things that were inspiring to the story that you wanted to tell.
Yeah, most of the inspirations were film and novels and stuff. So not so much games, but very very much got into just like going to the secondhand bookshop and like finding really cheesy looking, like finding the cheesiest like cover for a thriller and like just reading through it. And usually, yeah, very schlocky, Pulp Fiction kind of stuff. And then like like lots of B movies, like thrillers and horror movies, from especially 70s stuff. I just really enjoyed that stuff.
Give us some examples, Dave. You've got to tell us which ones you've looked at. I want to hear your pile of shame.
The biggest good sort of influences are things like Andromeda Strain and like Michael Crichton stuff, like Lost World as well. Like I think the way he crafts like layers on tension. So there's like you're in a lab, but also there's a nuke which is set to explode, and and there's a disease which has like come out, so they can't escape without triggering the explosion that's going to blow them all up. And like how are they going to get out of this situation? But also the tech thriller stuff there is really awesome. There's big, like I guess Cronenberg movies and John Carpenter stuff with the soundtrack especially. It's hard to think of particular ones. Like Robin Cook writes these really super cheesy medical thrillers, which are they like go into all this very specific detail about like this operating theater and what this surgeon's doing, and then something goes wrong, and that kind of thing, which I just really like because they're just so very like there's like 20 or 30 of them, but they're all really, they're kind of all almost the same, but like all like over the top thrillery stuff, and it's really fun.
I just wouldn't think medical thriller would be a thing, but
yeah, there's just so many. Well, there's so many thriller genres, like subgenres, that like that's what I liked about it. It's just like such a specific thing of like over the top medical descriptions of everything, and like, and then it's also a thriller. What else are good? Yeah. Oh man, there's so much stuff, but there's like, so I guess another one like Matthew Riley. Ice Station was like one which was just
classic growing up in Australia book to read.
Yeah. It's like so over the top how much like how out of the frying pan into the fire it is. Like, they just like there's a grenade and then they jump out, like throw the grenade away and they jump out. But now like killer whales like grabbed their leg and they're getting sucked under. So they like escape the killer whale and kick away from it. But they're now under the water and now they're under an ice sheet and they can't get out. But there's a submarine. So they swim into the torpedo tube and then, but then the baddies have got them. And it's like, just like the whole book's like that. And so that was a big influence in like, okay, how do I get that kind of pace?
Well, the Drifter seems pretty chilled in comparison, really, if you can talk about it like that way. Yeah, it's one of those games that I think is really interesting, and what I'm curious about, because obviously you've got this grounding in the adventure game culture, and that it's one of these genres that I'd say that in there's been a few recent ones like Curse of the Golden Idol and things like that have come out, which have sort of been breakout hits, but the genre itself has kind of been it's become a subgenre now. It's a niche sort of thing, and I'm curious about what you know about that particular community that you really appreciate, and what sort of games you're making. Is this for someone who is more of a general audience, or is it for those diehards?
Yeah, I definitely like to break out of the niche a bit. I guess one thing that I find really really pleasing is when there's someone who says they don't play those games and they played the demo and they're really excited about it. That's really satisfying because it's a genre I really love. Like I play heaps of it, and the community I'm part of as well. So yeah, that's something that would be definitely really really like it when it comes to a new audience and they go, oh, these games that are kind of a bit uncool, like seen as a bit uncool and kind of clunky and old fashioned, when people like kind of get what's good about them. Yeah, because there's a lot that adventure games can do that other games kind of can't, like in terms of narrative and storytelling, which I think are really cool.
Like what?
So yeah, I mean, one of the things they do really well is that the interplay between story and gameplay. Like the gameplay in a point and click, everything you examine or interact with can be part of like a sort of part of the story. Like you can click on a door and the character can tell you about that this door is a bit like the door my grandma had in her house when we were growing up, that it was flimsy and always creaked or something, and that just tells you a bit about the character or something. Like it's a silly kind of example, but like in most games you can have a bit of environmental storytelling, you can kind of get that, but you can't get it so direct. But yeah, with every kind of everything you examine and click on and every little interaction, it's basically a cutscene. So the cutscenes in the game, which tell the story, are kind of, they're much more intertwined with the gameplay. And so, most games you have the gameplay and then you have the cutscenes are very separate things. So you have a section of 20 minutes of gameplay and then a 2-minute cutscene and then another 20 minutes of gameplay. And so you get these two things happening at odds with each other a lot more.
I also really like that often you can get like much more internal dialogue that you would not normally get in other genres. Like there's a few examples I can think of which, there is a bit of that. Like Control is one of those ones that kind of comes to mind where there's a lot of that sort of back and forth. But it's something that feels typical of the genre, to hear that the player actually think to themselves about certain things or talk to themselves about certain things, and that line often blurs a little bit, which is kind of cool in a fun way.
It comes out. I think that comes out with the interface as well, like because the mouse cursor is almost an analog to the characters, the internal thoughts. Like you scan the mouse over the room and it's like the characters looking around and thinking about what they could do and how they could interact. That was an interesting thing to think about making it as well. And having the narrator is fun because you can do the unreliable narrator kind of stuff where like, are they really seeing what they're saying they're seeing and all that sort of stuff.
It's interesting actually because I did want to ask you about the mouse cursor as a way of interacting, but this game actually plays incredibly well on a controller. And I'm curious about sort of designing adventure games for controller interaction because I remember there used to be the thing about pixel hunting for literally the right thing you need to click on. And that was never that enjoyable, but it was part of the way that we used to play. But I'm curious because this kind of takes away that element. You really have got kind of a ring that you're kind of using to interact with different objects. Can you tell me more about designing that?
Yeah, so similarly to what I was, I guess, talking about, I wanted it to be kind of character centric. So you kind of, the idea I had was you pivot the character kind of looks around with the right stick, and that's kind of coming from where the player is standing on the screen. So it's this radial menu, and it was the same thing. It was like it should be what the character can look around at and see and think about in the room, and then so you have this sort of two phases to interaction, where you're sort of hovering the cursor or like using this radial menu to look around, and then the other way you decide to act, But yeah, it was definitely coming from thinking about how the cursor actually really works in terms of mapping the character's thoughts and stuff into the game. Because it was something I really wanted to try and solve. Because controlling a cursor with an analog stick is not that fun. But then when all the interactions are just like walk up to an object and press the button, I feel like it loses that thoughtful process, I guess. Yeah.
Well, there's many like opportunities in the game as well where you're actually having to move around and see what actually pops up nearby you. So you still have a bit of that little sort of search and find aspect of actually doing that within the game. Quite a few instances where I died because I wasn't quite at the right spot when I did, or I ran out of time with my little timer as well, which was fun and kind of frustrating in the same way. I'm like, oh, this is the good old days. This is the good old days. So. The game is so close to launch now, and I'm really curious because the team that you are part of, Powerhoof, kind of have a couple of different projects on the go. What are you working on at the moment now that the Drifter will soon be in people's hands?
I'll still be Drifter for a little bit more. So yeah, I'm going to work on Switch port and stuff after this as well. Barney's kind of got this project which I've forced him to have on the back burner while he's been helping me on the Drifter, called Acid Knife, and so he's like, yeah, still planning to go back to working on that. It's his pet project. And I've got some more stuff like this other adventure game called the Telwinium, which I've still got to do the final chapter for, and then I want to package that up and put that on Steam as well. So that's kind of the immediate future. But yeah, we've got so many things we want to do, and the Drifters sort of been taking up all our headspace for a while. But yeah, so Barney's really keen to get back working on Acid Knife. He's got lots of ideas for that game that things he's going to try. But he's built it up to have like heaps of stuff in it, and he's sort of trying to narrow it down to like what it's actually going to finally be as well.
Are you thinking that potentially you might get it to Switch 2 and use a bit of that mouse functionality and get the best of both worlds?
Yeah, like so it's all running on Switch and playable on Switch, but yeah, I've got to actually get a Switch 2 dev kit and get that mouse stuff happening as well, because that just makes so much sense. Like I've definitely developed it and designed it to be played handheld and work really nicely with the controller and stuff, but it just makes so much sense. Like, oh yeah, it's got a mouse now. Awesome. let's make it so you can switch, play however you want.
Dave, if you have to wind the clock back to the very beginning, what's the thing that you wish you knew right at the very start?
Well, I think if I knew right at the start that it would take this long, I just wouldn't have done it. So I probably shouldn't tell myself that. I'll keep that secret, because that was the thing that killed me on this project, is how long everything took. No, I'm very happy with how it's ended up. There's not much I'd change in terms of like, yeah, things I'm not happy with the project or anything like that. And it was actually pretty smooth. It was just everything took a long time. Like there's nothing where we had to chuck things away, or like there was a big disaster and we lost a lot of time for any particular reason. It was just a lot of work, you know.
There's only a couple of you in Powerhoof. The Drifter, it'll be out on the 17th of July on Steam, and as you heard, they're coming to Switch later this year. Dave, it's a pleasure. Let's not make it 7 years before the next one.
I'll try not to.
This has been Lightmap Sifter's interview podcast. Sifter is produced by Kyle Pauletto, Fiona Bartholomaeus, Kat Jahne, Naomi Jackson, Adam Christou, and Chris Button. Mitch Lowe is senior producer who edited this episode, and my name is Gianni Giovanni, and I am Sifter's executive producer. Thanks to Audio Technica Australia and Apple for their support of Sifter. Hey, if you like the shows that we have, give us a rating or a review. It's really important on your favorite podcast player. It helps people find the show. They're searching through for stuff and they see something that's rated 5 stars, which, you know, you give it any star rating, but you might want to give it 5 stars. That really helps people find the show. The other thing you should do is make sure you check out Sifter on our website, sifter.com.au. We're putting up reviews and other podcasts all the time up there. So if you like Australian look at the way that games are made and how we talk about them, make sure you go there, or find us at Sifter HQ on all of your favorite social media. That's all the time we have for this episode. Until next time, have fun.